I will start my share in a second, but before we do that, I am curious about what needs you all have so that we can make the best use of our time here today. I recognize a lot of names here, and I really appreciate you coming. So what sort of things are people struggling with or have questions on as you are launching into your annual updates? Why are you spending your lunch with me? I do have a slide set and I will go through it with a bunch of general stuff, but I'd like to know if anybody is having any particular hiccups or particular needs. No, okay. So I will launch into the presentation, and again, just raise your hand if you have questions that come up, or if as we're going through this, I trigger a thought or a memory of some issue you've had that others may benefit from. Do you all see the slides okay? And they look appropriate? Okay, so some of you know this and some of you may not know this, but I have worked in a volunteer capacity at the ACGME for over the last decade in different capacities. And so I have sort of an insider's view to what folks, an insider view on what review committees might be thinking about. Because I was the chair of the Family Medicine Review Committee, so I certainly have a lot of insights into the review committee and how they look at things in family medicine, but I also was part of the chair's council, so I also heard other review committees' thoughts and approaches to things. So I'd like to share some of that experience. I was also a program director for 12 years, so I know very well how ADS is a little bit glitchy and a little bit hard sometimes to figure out where to put what and how. But I'm going to start with, why we're here today. What my objectives for today are to understand the why of these updates. I think understanding the purpose of things like this are really helpful when you're spending your time on it. And then the structure of it. And then I really am open to you all starting some work on your annual updates. And even if somebody has a particular problem, they want to share their screen and have me look at it, I'm more than happy to do that. My presentation and our discussion really around my presentation should take no longer than an hour, and then I can just be available to help people do whatever they're having trouble with. And I really want to also encourage you to think about what your plan for review of the annual update is, because having that review is really important to get this right. So the why part of it is that the new accreditation system really looks at a continuous accreditation model. So just like a continuous improvement process, we're thinking about a PDSA, the self sort of assessment of your program is really important. The continuous accreditation part is that the review committee will be looking at data and flags throughout the year, and particularly when they get your annual update, they will recognize any issues. And that will may trigger a site visit if there's concerns from the review committee around the data that they're seeing. This means that not everybody will get scheduled site visits as had been done in the previous accreditation system, where essentially you got kind of a grade with each site visit that was either you were going to be seen again in 2 years or 3 years or 4 years or 5 years. And essentially in between, the review committee didn't know anything about your program. Now, again, it's more continuous. Every year they get data. Every year they're looking at your program. And a lot of the review committees, are mostly consent agenda, but some programs will fall out and will be more closely reviewed. You essentially want all of your ADS responses to assume that somebody is going to be looking at them to answer a question about your program. So just like a PDSA cycle, the continuous program improvement is really this kind of cycle. And we have a yearly cycle to this. And a lot of times what we do as program directors and program coordinators is to really focus on how to plan what we're doing, all those hours we spend putting the schedule together and making sure services are covered and making sure the curriculum is meeting requirements and implementing that, making sure the didactics are happening the way that we plan them to is really a big part of our job. And this is really focused on the process part of things. But the process is only one piece because we really want to know that we're getting to the outcomes that we're looking for. And so the other side of this is reporting to really look at outcomes. So are your didactics actually meeting the goals of having people pass their board examinations and be competent physicians? So thinking about the process is how we do things, but the outcomes is really down to the why we do things, which is to train competent physicians in all the specialties. So again, when the review committee is looking at this information, they want to find answers to their question. They really want to determine that programs are in substantial compliance with the program requirements. And they want to rectify any concerns they have. And so you just want to answer their questions and you want to be as clear and concise and accurate as possible to help the review committee help you. Review committee members are not out to get you. They really are trying to help you and to see what's really happening in your program. So just be transparent about what's going on and how you're addressing any issues that you might have. And that helps the review committee say, oh yeah, they're on it. They have some issues, but they have a good plan in place to address those issues. The annual review by the review committee looks at several performance indicators. Many of those do not come from you. So because of the ongoing reporting in ADS, any program attrition, leadership changes, the scholarly activity, all of those pieces are going to, obviously you're going to enter the scholarly activity, you're going to enter the clinical experience data. The board pass rate will come to them from the boards directly. The resident survey, faculty survey are run by the ACGME, and they'll have that data already. And then in terms of milestones, they won't be looking at performance of the milestones, but just that they're done. And so they have those ahead of time as well. Now, in terms of what you need to make sure of in your annual update is the major update section, which really is a misnomer because it's really for any updates. So any curricular changes, any site changes, any new faculty that are going to bring more expertise should all be commented on in your major update section. Citation responses, I know there's only a few programs with citations, but making sure that those are strong responses. And again, clarify any concerns the review committee might have about that. Your rosters need to be up to date. And when it comes to your faculty roster, absolutely make sure that your board certification is all up to date. So you should be able to look down that roster and make sure there aren't any dates before 2023. And if you see a date that's before 2023, make sure that there's a good explanation for it, like that specialist doesn't need to keep up their initial certification in their primary specialty or something like that. But just make sure that those dates are correct and that they're updated. It's easy to miss that because it's a small thing. The clinical experience data, make sure you have a good way of receiving the information that you need to report on in your specialty. Scholarly activity. So there's two things about scholarly activity. One is that table that you're going to do for all the faculty members. The other is where you have the CV for the program director. And on that CV for the program director, you should only be including the last 5 years of publications, of scholarly activity. So this is another place where just check those dates. You shouldn't have anything earlier than 2018 in those dates, right? So if somebody published something in 2017, that should be taken off the list and then add something new if there is something new. And they also have a limit to how many you should include. It's up to 10, I think, for those different areas. So just make sure they're within the last 5 years and that you don't have more than the number that they recommend. And then again, making sure the PLAs are up to date. And I know this is something our office is kind of hounding all of you about all the time. So just making sure, again, your block diagram and your PLAs line up. If that will be a red flag for the RC if they're looking at your block diagram and they see, you know, a month at some facility that then you don't have a PLA for. So your block diagram should be those required rotations, and you should have a PLA in ACGME for every required rotation. So those things should line up. So the other thing is to just know the resources. There's lots and lots of help available at the ACGME website. And if you go into your specialty under documents and resources, you will find specifically the presentation that was done at annual meeting. And in that, you can find the most common citations in your specialty. So it gives you a way of knowing your review committee's sort of where their Hawkeye is, essentially what they're looking at closely. So use those resources well. And also look at the FAQs for your specialty. I always say, you know, doing these annual updates is an open book test. So make sure that you have the book open, right? So have your specialty requirements handy when you're filling out your WebADS, and when you see a question and you're not sure exactly what they're asking, look at the requirement that they are referring to and make sure that you understand the background and intent and any FAQ around that particular requirement. And again, I would really encourage you to find the frequent citations and make sure that you clarify any issues that they're looking at specifically. So when you go into ADS, this is kind of a tricky thing. I think it's helpful that old data carries forward, but you need to make sure that that old data is still up to date, right? So sometimes in the information that you put in last year, you'll have particular dates, or particular occurrences that actually happened in the previous academic year. So you just want to make sure you update those things. A lot of times I'll see things like we hired a new X, Y, or Z, and it will carry forward like 3 years, just because it's like, yeah, they're still there, they're, you know, whatever, but just update the language for the current academic year. You may not have to make a huge amount of changes, but just be sure that it is updated. And obviously, if you've made changes to curriculum and things like that, make sure to update it. Make sure that you use the block diagram preferred by your review committee. So in family medicine, we had over 700 programs. If we didn't have a block diagram template and we were just using every organization's like special little thing that they were doing, like sometimes people would send in the schedule, and we couldn't make heads or tails of that compared to the block diagram template that we made. So be sure to use the template that they're requesting. It's not mandatory that you do, but it's helpful. And then again, in terms of the rosters, make sure that you're updating the scholarly activity. I find it easiest to build in regular scholarly activity for residents. So, you know, we had 36 residents in our program, and I knew that every time they were on MCH, they would do a presentation. And so I could just count that down. And also, I know some programs use a Google type of form. I think you sent this out, Liz, for just the resident to just touch, one click and fill out what they did in the last year, because it's very hard as program director to know exactly what everybody did. And you want credit for all of that. So both for the resident fellow and for the faculty, try to keep up on the scholarly activity. Each review committee has kind of a different threshold for what they expect, even though the requirements are pretty similar. Some review committees really prefer PMIDs, and others, are fine with the bigger Boyer's model. So just know your specialty, know what's expected, and then build it into your curriculum in a way that all residents are achieving that floor. There are these common questions that you will see, and for continued accreditation, there's actually just a few questions. And as I showed on the previous slide, those questions will mostly stay from year to year, and you just need to update them, your answers. Some of the questions change slightly, and so make sure to just keep up on what that looks like. I think this question was removed. So in the past, program directors needed to attest regarding the 80-hour work week. They took this away, and it's asked in a slightly different way. And on the institutional level, we have a new question about how we're attending to the duty hours. Okay, so then we no longer have COVID-19 questions, at least this year. We'll see going forward. There are specific questions in DEI regarding recruitment and retention, and I did send out a handout regarding this to think about the institutional efforts in this way, and we'll continue to try to support you with those efforts. And then just really make sure, again, I can't stress enough the importance of up-to-date information about any changes with program leadership or the curriculum, etc. And again, those changes to curriculum, if you change something and you have something new on your block diagram, there's a reason for that, and you can explain that in your updates, and hopefully, shine a light on how closely you're paying attention to feedback from residents, or, and looking for better learning experiences. And that just speaks to, again, that continuous improvement of your program. You also really want to look at those surveys that are done by the ACGME. And if there are red flags in the survey that came up for you, like you see a trend down in some particular area, then you may want to comment on that in your update section. So, on review of our committee, that on our survey this year, we noticed that there was a trend down in this particular area. These are the steps we've taken to address that trend. Again, answering the review committee's questions and clarifying that you're totally on top of these. Even small changes will make a big difference in the discussion. So imagine that your committee is reviewing this survey, reviewing your program and looking at the survey and saying, oh, they were flagged because of this. But look, in their update section, they've already done X, Y, and Z for this. So let's make it an AFI instead of a citation. It's, there aren't hard and fast rules, and you can alter the outcome for these decisions. Then if you have a citation, again, really important to address that citation with as much data as possible. So if you had a citation on, I don't know, resident scholarly activity, show that you built a curriculum on that, you built a new structure for that, and these are the outcomes. This year's residents have more than last year's residents, and although we haven't quite met our goal yet, we are certainly on trajectory for doing that. Our first years now have engaged in this way. Like, go through as much data as you can. There's an excellent resource here at the ACGME in terms of how to respond to citations. And you'll see some good examples and bad examples in the handout there. So sometimes people respond to a citation in a circular way and don't actually answer the questions that the review committee might have. So just thinking about that. how I think about the response to citations, really make sure you understand the requirement and why that requirement is there. So again, look at the background and intent, look for any FAQs. If it's a common citation, there's likely information of how to rectify that. Respond directly to the citation. Again, try not to be circular about it, and then share any data you have. It would amaze you some of the ways that program directors respond to citations and how they can get quite defensive or argumentative. And again, don't miss kind of the big picture of the citation. So what is the reason that the review committee is concerned about this particular citation in the big picture of developing, competent physicians. So then there's a new question in terms of participating sites this year around is this site for patient care? So again, you may have some activities and some participating sites where residents are not caring for patients. And so although the question is optional this year, it's required for next year. And I don't know why it would be difficult to answer, but just so you know, that's there. Again, just keeping all those participating sites up to date and making sure it matches up with the block diagram. In terms of the block diagram, we talked about this already. Make sure that it reflects the current experiences. Make sure the PLAs line up and the participating sites listed in ACGME line up, and use the template just for clarifying sake. And also read all the small print. Like I was looking through one of these annual updates today, and there was small print about explaining. There was a question earlier on in the annual updates, and then there was small print about explaining on the block diagram, how that was accomplished or something. So just making sure you're reading through everything and seeing if there's any additional information that needs to be included on your block diagram. And also just make sure to save it as a PDF. And so the formatting is exactly how you want it, and upload it. And just make sure to go through everything that you upload and it looks exactly like you want it to look. We talked about the residents and fellows. Make sure that you have folks who are off cycle updated. Make sure that you have all the current residents and fellows there. And of course, the scholarly activity and remembering sort of the bigger model of scholarship going beyond research and beyond publication, but all of those different areas. And again, building methods and strategies in your program for collecting that information is really important. Similarly, for the faculty, make sure to remove faculty that have left or transitioned out of the program, because remember, this faculty roster is going to be what pushes the survey. And so you want to make sure the right people are listed that know your program and can appropriately assess your program. And then, like I said before, make sure those certifications are up to date. And then the scholarly activity we talked about. So when it comes down to reviewing all your sections of ADS, I think the easiest thing to do is to print the report and save it as a PDF and share it with others to review, sort out who it is you want to review it. Sort of before you hit the submit button. Now I've asked that you get this at least, a good draft to me by the end of next week. Sherry and I will review them and get any feedback to you. We're really looking over them with a fine-tooth comb. So we fully expect to give you feedback and get it back to you. Don't see that as some sort of failure. We just want to make sure that everything is as clear as possible for the ACGME and there aren't any kind of silly citations or mistakes that bring citations. That's kind of the most frustrating thing as a program director, to get a citation that's not even true. And so Sherry and I will try to find the needles in the haystacks in terms of anything that might be confusing. And I'm sorry. As far as I know, the certifications are not updated by the board. Although Sherry brought this up Oh, and Shirley, you're saying it is for OB. Okay, so maybe that did get changed, but I'm not, we were looking at some today that were not updated. And if people are, you may need to change, I wonder, Sherry, if the thing we were looking at today, you need to change it from a time limited to an MOC, and maybe that column is not updated by the board. And so if that's the case, then the old date stays in for the time limited. So I'd be happy to look at it with you, Cassie, and see what you're seeing. But when you print the report, you shouldn't be seeing people who are not board certified on your faculty list, or people who have expired certifications on your faculty list. There's something wrong with that if you're seeing expired, and it may be that you need to change it to MOC. So that is definitely an improvement in WebADS. If the board is updating those, that's great. It's easy to find them online too, but again, maybe I can look at one of yours to see how that looks for you. But in any case, when you print it, you shouldn't have folks who have expired board certifications. So looking that over. Okay, so this is where you would go to print the summary, and then you can share it with people to review. And again, I encourage you to kind of go through the ACGME website, really, for all of this information. You may think you aren't missing anything, but if you look through the FAQs, you may, be misunderstanding something that the RC sees differently. So thinking about that. We went over that. So then in terms of due dates and things, so again, Sherry and I are really hoping that you can get your nearly finished updates to us by the end of next week. For those of you who are non-case log data specialties, and then for those of you with a September due date, again, a couple of weeks before the due date. And again, if you have an APD, I think they're a terrific person to review this. So, and if there's somebody who's running a particular part of the curriculum and knows your program really well, they might be a good time. Yeah, and the faculty roster does have an area for comments about folks who don't meet requirements. And again, it just helps to put it right there, and then the review committee doesn't have to spend time hunting down that answer. There's certainly folks who have just graduated and who are new faculty who are board eligible but haven't become board certified yet, and that's a totally normal thing, but you don't want the review committee questioning that. Just have it there for them. All right, so let me stop sharing and bring you guys up. So what questions do you have? I went through that relatively quickly. I've seen Liz take a lot of notes. Concerned, Liz.
Yes, just trying to get a handle on what all this entails, as it's my first time doing it.
No, I appreciate that, and I'm happy to help any way I can, Liz, as you're doing that. Many of you have experienced this in the past, maybe many times. Any words of wisdom from the group at all? Things that you've learned along the way? Bina, I know you have lots of expertise.
Actually, not really. This is just the second time I would be doing it. So learning along the process.
Hello, this is Shirley from OB. It's more like a question than a comment.
Yeah.
One of the things that I struggle with is we know the report is from the previous year, but some of the information are for the year to come. It's always like difficult to know which part that it's for the year before or it's for the year to come. So it's also like always a struggle. If you could have a list of the section that says, okay, this is for the year that just passed, or this is for the coming year.
Yeah, so so obviously for a lot of the data that you're entering, it's going to say specifically the time frame, and it's going to say July 1, 2022 to June 30th, 2023. And so you're going to see that in places like the scholarly activity. When it comes to your major updates, I say take advantage of both. Like if you notice something in the last year, making a change and are going to be doing something different, that's a good place to say, we've hired this person, we've added this curriculum, we've done whatever. And that's obviously looking to the future. The block diagram, I think, is one of those confusing areas, Shirley, that I always kind of struggled with. And so being really specific about, we made a major change to our curriculum. This is the block diagram for going forward. And I think that's actually more helpful for the review committee to have, like, to review the current structure of your curriculum. So I would definitely use your going forward block diagram. And if you need to make a note about those changes and about how, in the previous year, the data we're reporting on was X, Y, or Z, and we've made this change, you can either make that in the update section or right on the block diagram, you can put an asterisk and say new as of AY24. But I do think that's one of the areas that I would wonder about. Like, this is an annual review of last year, but now we're doing this, and it's kind of both. So if you can imagine, if you were, the pieces that you would include in an application would be the pieces that would be going forward, looking at the future. And the pieces that you're going to use to do your annual program evaluation, like the data and those sort of things, that would just include the time frame. Most of the time when they want last year's data or information, they will give you a specific time frame in it. So I hope that's helpful, Shirley, but that's the way I would think about it.
Yes, it's very helpful. I was thinking about the block diagram, which you mentioned. What we do, we put the academic year at the very top so they know which year we're talking about. And then we use the one going forward. Now, the other place that I'm sometimes confused is when you have to list the evaluation method, where you have your CCC committee and also your PEC. So we talk about the year prior, we talk about the year to come. So this is another place where I'm not always sure which year we're talking about.
Yeah,
So
and I would say that's something that would be in your application. And so I would say going forward. But if you made like a major change to it for a reason, I would make a note of that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. And for the evaluation methods, I would say, yeah, going forward, this is your plan for evaluation. And again, you can note those improvements, take credit for everything you do that, we reviewed X, we saw this, we're trying this. That's the real test of the continuous improvement process that we're hoping to achieve in this accreditation system.
Yeah.
The review committee would like to get out of the business of having to micromanage. They just want to say, oh, this program's on top of it. We don't need to look at the details. They're obviously looking at the details. And I see, Denise, you have a question about the APE. That should have gone out through MedHub this week. So if you go into MedHub, it's assigned to the program director, but the coordinators should be able to see it and edit it. If you're having trouble, let us know in the office and we can walk you through it. Cassie and I scheduled it together to go out yesterday, so it should have. Yeah, thank you, Monique.
Yeah, so I just want to take a minute to share a couple from my experience from last year of the forms that were rejected and kind of give you those. I know Dr. Potts had mentioned them, but just to reiterate, make sure that you use the word UMass Chan Medical School. So sometimes the CHAN was left off, and that would have to require the form to be rejected. There were also a handful that had the current licensure data under the program director CV section that was expired. So please check the expirations on that. A few of those were rejected because of that reason. Also, as previously mentioned, in regards to the dates, so you'll see when they're putting in a publications information or participation in activities, it specifies on the form from the last 5 years. So do please make sure that you comply with that, and anything from 2017 or earlier is removed from the form. That does not need to be included. So just keep anything from 2018 to present on the form. And then the last area was in regards to the program resources section. So this is going to be the dedicated time for the program director, the APD, and then the program coordinator. So you'll have your specific value from the program, but please double check against the requirements in the ACGME website. So that's going to that specialties section, and then you click on your program, and then you'll click on the program requirements. And it should be the document that says currently effective July 1st, 2023. So you'll want to use that one, and you'll see for your specific program, it's usually within the first 10 or 15 pages, they'll identify what the resources are for the program director, the APD, and the program coordinator based on the number of residents or fellows in your program. So please make sure that you are in compliance with that, because that is eligible for a citation if you're not. And if you just the other thing is, if you're not in compliance, say for example that you typically as a program coordinator allocated 20%, but then you check against the requirements within the ACGME subspecialty section that says you needed to be 25% a dedicated time, that is up to the program to provide that funding and find the means to allocate to get you to that 25%. But that's a big ticket area for citations, not being in compliance there. So that's just a few of the areas I wanted to share based on my experience last year, that a lot of these forms had to be rejected. And I do agree, it makes sense even when I review them to print the document out first. I think it's easier to find errors and mistakes seeing an actual printout, and I'm all about saving the trees and that kind of thing, but it does seem to make a difference printing it out versus viewing it on the screen.
The other thing too, that I think when you print the summary, you'll find that things get pulled in that you didn't even know were part of it. Because when you go through each of those like little check marks, there's also, I always found as program director, I'm like, oh, where did that come from? Where do I find that? How do I fix that? Just the way WebADS is set up. So just, I think it makes it easier that way too. So what other questions do you have? That was super quick.
I have a question. This is Liz. When I'm looking at my faculty and resident ACGME surveys and evaluations, do you find that there's a particular threshold that the committee has for me needing to address something? Is it like a certain percentage of compliance, or how it compares to the specialty? I just want to know what sort of things to look out for.
Yeah, so I would say that each review committee is going to be a little bit different about their hotspots, but the big things are to look at the trends. So that report across the bottom where you see those like summary pieces. And if you see anything that has gone down those 3 years that are on the trend, that might be something that you want to address. Certainly, if you're well below the national mean in any of the points in terms of the score, and then if the compliance, certainly if the compliance is less than 50%, you want to address that. And if it's less than 75, like take a look at the national mean and see how far off you are there. But those would be sort of like the big broad strokes. And certainly if you've gotten a citation about one part of the survey in the past, that would be an area that I would look at again.
Thank you.
Because the review committee will have your history too. So those citations, although they sort of go away, they don't really go away. They're there to be seen. And again, if you got an AFI, now the AFIs are a little bit different because you don't have to respond to them. And I should have a slide all about this, but you don't have to respond to an AFI, and the review committee isn't necessarily going to look at you because you have an AFI. But if you have a citation, they're definitely going to be looking at you, and then they'll also look at the AFIs. And so you want to, in your update section, you won't have a different section to respond to those AFIs, but in your update section, you want to address the AFIs. Program thanks the committee for their, recommending improvement in this area. We went to look for resources to address that. This is what we did in the future. But the AFIs are like, warnings that we're going to be looking at this really closely and we'll consider a citation in the future. And so getting ahead of that and being proactive about how you responded to it and providing any data that shows that you responded to that AFI is important. Any other questions? Appreciate you spending your lunchtime with me. We look forward to seeing your reports. And I know we sent out also, as came up, the annual program evaluation and improvement plans. And that's another spot, looking at your action items from last year, that's another spot that you can consider as you're putting together your major updates, like what, again, on your review last year, what did you notice? What did the program notice? What were the action items? What steps did you take to address those action items? All right. Well, I'm going to stop recording and feel free